Welcome to this special deep dive, designed for you if you're curious about where artificial intelligence is heading. Today, we're tackling something really crucial, but maybe a bit overlooked: AI standardization.
Yeah, it doesn't always grab the headlines like, say, a new AI model, but setting the rules of the road for AI. It's incredibly important.
It really is. Think of it as the rule book for the AI revolution being written right now.
Exactly. And it's a space where tech, politics, economics, they all collide. The stakes are, well, they're sky high.
So we're going to dig into why setting these AI ground rules has turned into this, well, global contest, and what happens if different places have totally different rule books. Imagine, like, if the internet had completely separate rules on different continents.
That's a great analogy. It would be chaotic.
Right, and we'll look at how the big players, the US, China, the EU, are tackling this, because they're definitely not all on the same page.
Our goal here is really to unpack this complex picture, pull out the key insights, and figure out why this matters to anyone interested in tech's future, without getting totally bogged down in jargon.
We want those aha moments for you.
Exactly.
And we've got some great material to help us analyses on the contested terrain and the geopolitics of AI standards, a study guide, even a timeline. So let's jump in. Why? Why is international AI standardization such a contested space right now?
Well, the core thing is that nations basically agree on one point: being a leader in AI. Not just building it, but also governing it, setting the standards that's seen as absolutely vital for future global power.
Okay, so it's not just about having the best tech.
No, not at all. It impacts everything. Economic competitiveness, sure, but also national security, global influence. It's fundamentally about shaping the future.
Yeah.
You could almost say it's a power play wrapped up in technical discussions.
Influence, then, as much as innovation.
Precisely. And because everyone wants to lead, or at least shape things their way, you get this fragmented picture. Not one global plan, but different regions developing their own standards.
Reflecting their own priorities, I guess.
Exactly. Their values, their economic goals, their political systems. It all feeds into the kind of standards they want to see.
Which leads us to this term that keeps popping up: digital fragmentation. What does that actually mean when we're talking about AI standards?
So digital fragmentation here really means the rise of different, sometimes totally incompatible AI standards in different parts of the world.
Right.
Think back to that internet analogy, or maybe like having phone chargers that only work in certain countries, but for AI systems. It stops things working together smoothly.
Okay, that sounds like, well, a bit of a headache at least. What are the real problems this fragmentation could cause? Can you give us the rundown?
Oh, it's more than a headache, potentially. The consequences could be pretty significant.
Cool.
First off, it can really put the brakes on innovation.
Absolutely.
Well, if systems can't easily connect or share data because they follow different rules, it just makes global collaboration harder. Developing and deploying AI across borders becomes much more complex.
Okay, so slower innovation. What else?
Cybersecurity gets trickier. If everyone has a different approach to risk management or system design, you don't have that consistent defense posture. It potentially creates gaps and weaknesses. Defending a fractured system is just harder.
Makes sense.
And third, it definitely acts as a barrier to international trade. Businesses face higher costs trying to comply with different rules everywhere. It might favor domestic players, limit consumer choice. Maybe that cool AI tool you want isn't available where you are, or it costs more.
So it hits innovation, security, and trade, pretty major impacts. Okay, let's zoom in on those different approaches. How are the US, China, and the EU actually handling this? What's the key difference in their thinking?
Yeah, this is crucial. They really do represent distinct philosophies. Broadly speaking, you could say the U.S. is prioritizing innovation with a lighter touch, China is using a top-down directive approach, and the EU is focused on a comprehensive, rights-based regulatory system.
Okay, break that down a bit. The US.
So the U.S. traditionally prefers what's called a light touch approach. The main goal is to let the private sector innovate rapidly. They tend to emphasize processes involving multiple stakeholders, industry, academia, government, and often rely on voluntary guidelines rather than strict laws, at least initially. The idea is to build consensus, often through international cooperation, too.
Kind of like, let's see what emerges and guide it.
That's a pretty good way to put it, yeah. Innovation first, with regulation playing more of a supporting role.
Okay, and China. You said top-down.
Very much so. China employs a far more centralized and directive strategy. The government actively shapes and mandates national and industrial standards. These aren't just about economics. They're often explicitly linked to goals around national security and social stability.
And they have specific targets, right?
Yes. That 2026 goal is telling aiming to formulate over 50 national and industrial AI standards. It shows a very deliberate, state-driven ambition to shape the field according to their priorities.
Right, a very planned approach. Then there's the EU with the AI Act we hear so much about.
Exactly. The EU has gone for a comprehensive, risk-based regulatory framework. The AI Act lays down broad principles, particularly around safety and fundamental rights. Then it relies on technical standards developed by standardization bodies to fill in the detailed implementation.
So more proactive regulation.
Definitely. It's much more about setting binding rules up front to manage potential risks, especially for high-risk AI applications, compared to the U.S.'s more wait-and-see voluntary style. It really emphasizes protecting citizens.
Okay, so three distinct blueprints emerging. Now, in the middle of this national competition, what about international bodies? You mentioned ISO IE JTC1 SC42. Bit of a mouthful.
Yeah, it is. JTC1 SC42 is the main joint technical committee between ISO and IEC, focused specifically on AI. Think of them, and others like the ITU, as trying to be the neutral conveners.
The Switzerland of AI standards?
Sort of, yeah. Despite all the geopolitical friction, these bodies provide really important forums. They use consensus-based processes, bringing together experts from all over the world, industry, academics, governments, civil society groups.
Trying to find common ground, basically.
That's the aim, to create a shared set of international standards for AI that's responsible, safe, trustworthy, and, crucially, to prevent any single nation from just imposing its own rules on everyone else.
And are they actually producing anything?
Oh, yes. They've already published some key standards. ISO IEC 42001 is about AI management systems, basically, how organizations can manage AI development and use responsibly. And ISO IEC 23894 deals with AI risk management. These are concrete steps towards creating a common technical language.
It's interesting, though, how those national values we talked about, U.S. focus on innovation, EU on rights, China on stability, must still play out even within those international bodies.
Absolutely. That interplay is fascinating. National delegations bring their priorities to the table. So you'll see debates where, for instance, Western countries might push harder on privacy aspects, reflecting their values, while others might emphasize different concerns, maybe around performance or state oversight.
And it's not just what the standard says, but how it gets made, right? You mentioned the U.S. multi-stakeholder versus China's state-led approach earlier.
Precisely. The processes themselves reflect those values. The U.S. model, aiming for broad input, mirrors its democratic ideals. China's more top-down, state-coordinated approach reflects its governance system. These deep-seated differences in how you even develop a standard inevitably shape the outcome. It makes finding that universal common ground really challenging.
So it feels like we're stuck between national competition pushing things apart and international bodies trying to pull them together. Given this fragmentation, are there realistic ways to get more international cooperation happening?
It's tough, but not impossible. There are pathways people are exploring. One big one is strengthening those international bodies, ISO, ITU, and others, making sure they have the resources and, importantly, ensuring broad, diverse participation, so it's not just the big players dominating.
So getting more voices in the room.
Exactly. And related to that is capacity building. Helping countries, especially developing nations, gain the technical expertise to actually participate meaningfully in these complex standardization discussions. Otherwise, their needs get overlooked.
That makes a lot of sense. What else?
Finding common ground on maybe less politically charged technical areas, things like AI safety protocols, reliability testing, and especially interoperability, making different systems work together. There might be more shared interest there.
Focus on the nuts and bolts where everyone benefits.
Potentially, yes. And another idea is this concept of multi-tiered governance. Maybe you have a baseline of international principles or standards, but allow for regional or national variations on top of that to accommodate different priorities, as long as the core works together.
A layered approach. Okay, now we've touched on influence. These standards aren't just technical documents. They're seen as tools, right? How do they become tools for influence and market access?
Yeah, this is a key part of geopolitics. If a country, say country A, successfully promotes its preferred standards internationally, its domestic companies gain an edge.
Oh.
Because their products and services are already built to that standard. They face fewer adaptation costs when selling globally compared to companies from country B who might have to re-engineer things to meet country A's standard if it becomes the global norm.
Ah, I see. So you're essentially shaping the global market to fit your home team.
That's a good way to think about it. You're embedding your technological approach, maybe even your values, into the global infrastructure. It influences the direction of future innovation, too.
And China's big push for standards that fits this picture.
Absolutely. That plan for over 50 standards is a clear example of using standardization strategically. It aims to align international norms with China's own technological strengths and ultimately boost its AI exports and global tech standing.
So looking ahead, if this fragmentation trend continues, what are the likely long-term geopolitical consequences? It sounds like it could really reshape things.
I think the consensus is that the consequences could be quite profound. We're likely looking at increased technological fragmentation worldwide,
Meaning?
meaning we could end up with distinct AI ecosystems, almost like digital blocks operating under different rules, with limited ability for systems from one block to work seamlessly with systems from another.
Like a digital iron curtain, almost.
That might be a bit strong, but you can see the parallel. It could definitely mirror and even reinforce existing geopolitical divides. The US-aligned tech sphere, China-aligned tech sphere, maybe an EU sphere.
And that could raise tensions.
It certainly could. It might accelerate this trend. People talk about technological decoupling, where countries try to become more self-sufficient digitally and less reliant on potential rivals. AI standards could become, a major new battleground in that geopolitical competition.
Okay, we've covered a lot about this fragmented landscape. Let's just maybe crystallize the core ideas around the geopolitics of AI standards. What are the absolute key takeaways?
I think the first thing to stress again is that this fragmentation isn't happening by accident. It's the direct outcome of geopolitical competition. Major powers are making deliberate choices based on their own interests and values.
It's strategic.
It's absolutely strategic, and those distinct national approaches are central to understanding it.
Right, just to recap quickly. U.S. favoring that lighter innovation-first approach. China, with its very centralized, state-directed push, setting those ambitious targets.
Yep, the 50-plus standards by 2026 goal.
And the EU carving out its path with the comprehensive risk-based AI Act, focused on rights and safety.
Exactly. Those three provide the main contours. And this divergence, as we've said, fuels that digital fragmentation.
With all the negative impacts we discussed on innovation, trade, security.
And the real risk of what some call a regulatory arms race, where standards become weapons in geopolitical conflict rather than tools for global good.
Now, you mentioned some international organizations trying to bridge these gaps. Can we talk a bit more about what they're actually doing? Give us some concrete examples from ISOAC, ITU, UNESCO, OECD.
Sure. These groups are working hard, even with the headwinds. ISOAC JTC1 SC42, that main AI committee, is actively developing standards across the whole AI lifecycle. We mentioned ISOAC 42001 on management systems. That's a practical framework companies can use now.
Okay. What about the others? ITU.
The ITU, the UN's Agency for Information and Communication Tech, focuses on open, inclusive standardization. They have things like the International AI Standards Exchange platform to share information, and their AI for Good initiative tries to harness AI for sustainable development goals.
And UNESCO and the OECD. They seem more focused on principles.
That's generally right. UNESCO's recommendation on the ethics of artificial intelligence was a landmark effort to create a global ethical framework, emphasizing human rights. It's not a treaty, but it's influential.
Okay.
And the OECD, representing mostly developed economies, has its AI principles, which promote trustworthy AI. They provide guidance for policymakers on how to foster AI that's beneficial and respects democratic values. They recently updated these too.
Are there other efforts worth mentioning?
Yeah, there are various initiatives bubbling up, things like proposals for a UN AI standards exchange, the ongoing work on a global digital compact to the UN, and the G7 group's Hiroshima AI process, all trying to foster dialogue and find common approaches, especially on safety.
So lots of activity, but clearly major challenges remain. What are the biggest roadblocks to getting more cooperation right now?
A huge one is data. Different rules, especially around data privacy and cross-border data flows, make international collaboration really difficult. If you can't easily share data for training or research, developing truly global AI solutions is a massive hurdle.
The standards themselves become barriers.
Exactly. Divergent technical standards in other areas too, testing, validation, risk assessment, add layers of complexity. And underlying it all are those differing national priorities and levels of trust.
So, given those challenges, what are the most promising recommendations for actually improving collaboration? What concrete steps could help?
Well, building on what we said earlier, really strengthening those international standards bodies is key. Giving them resources, ensuring balanced participation.
The capacity building point you made.
Yes, helping all countries engage meaningfully. Then actively seeking out areas of common ground, maybe focusing initially on technical standards for safety, reliability, interoperability, where the mutual benefit is clear.
Find the low-hanging fruit, maybe.
Perhaps. Or at least the areas where the need for cooperation is most obvious. And finally, seriously exploring those multi-tiered governance models, finding ways to blend global baselines with necessary local flexibility.
It sounds complex but necessary.
Yeah.
Okay, let's shift perspective slightly. Looking back, can you highlight a few key moments from the timeline? When did this really start taking shape?
It's evolved quickly, especially in the last, say, 5-7 years. A key starting point was establishing that main AI Standards Committee, ISO IE JTC1 C42, around 2017-2018. That formalized the international effort.
Right.
Then you had the OECD AI Principles in 2019 and the UNESCO Ethics Recommendation in 2021, setting important normative frameworks.
Setting the tone?
Exactly. Then China started issuing specific regulations, like on recommendation algorithms and deepfakes, around 2021-2022. That showed national rules getting very concrete. The U.S. blueprint for an AI Bill of Rights in 2022 outlined principles from their side. The EU AI Act development has been ongoing for a few years now, a major regulatory push.
10 more recently.
China setting that 2026 goal for national standards is significant. And ISO IE publishing those key standards on AI management and risk in 2023 shows the international technical work is bearing fruit. It's a very dynamic timeline.
It really is moving fast. And just to be clear, who are the main actors, the key players we should keep an eye on in this whole drama?
Okay, the cast of characters. You've got the international bodies,
Right.
ISO 8, JTC, 1SC42, the ITU, UNESCO, OECD, crucial platforms.
Right.
Then the major national players. China, with its government agencies like the SIC, Cyberspace Administration, and MIIT, Ministry of Industry and Infotech. The U.S., with agencies like NIST, National Institute of Standards and Technology, and the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, plus Congress and the White House.
And the EU?
The EU structure, the European Commission, the Parliament, the new AI office that oversees the AI Act, and their own standardization bodies, ESOs.
So governments and international groups, anyone else?
Absolutely. Industry is huge. Big tech companies, AI startups, they're deeply involved in standards development and lobbying. And don't forget civil society organizations and academic researchers. They bring vital perspectives on ethics, rights, and potential harms. It's a multi-actor landscape.
That's a really helpful overview. This has been fascinating, digging into the weeds of AI standards. But let's pull back for a moment. For you listening, why does all this technical and geopolitical maneuvering actually matter? Why should you care about this contested terrain?
Yeah, it might seem abstract, but it boils down to this. The rules being written now will directly shape the AI tools you use every day.
How so?
They'll influence how those tools work, what features they have, how reliable they are, how your data is used, what safeguards are in place. Different standards could mean very different user experiences depending on where you are.
And it's bigger than just the tools. Right?
Much bigger. It affects economic opportunities, which companies thrive, which regions lead in AI innovation. It impacts national security. And fundamentally, it influences the future balance of global power. This isn't just a tech debate amongst engineers. It's a core conversation about the kind of AI-driven future we're building.
So whether that cool new AI app is available to you, or how much it costs, or how safe it is, that could all come down to these standards battles.
That's exactly right. The choices made in these seemingly obscure committees and policy debates will have very real-world consequences for all of us.
Wow. Well, we've certainly covered a lot of ground, but honestly, it feels like we've only scratched the surface. This whole area of AI standards geopolitics is so complex, and it's changing constantly.
It really is. It's a story that's very much still unfolding, and as we've discussed, the implications are huge.
So if you're keen to explore this further, what would you suggest?
Well, you could definitely check out the work of those international organizations we mentioned, ISO IEC, ITU, OECD, UNESCO. Following policy developments in the US, China, and the EU is a key look at government websites, major news outlets.
Maybe even dive into some of the specific standards.
If you're technically inclined, absolutely. Looking at something like ISO IE's 42001 can give you a real sense of what these standards actually look like in practice.
Great suggestions. Thank you so much for walking us through this complex topic.
My pleasure. It's a critical conversation to be having.
And thank you for joining us for this deep dive. We really hope this has given you some valuable insights into a crucial, if sometimes hidden, dimension of the AI revolution.